Before we begin this story, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. That way you won't miss any new stories of mystery, psychological horror, and cases that defy explanation. And now tell me, where are you watching this video from? Write the name of your city or country in the comments. I love to know how far these stories are reaching. You don't arrive at Villisca axe murder house by chance. The road leading there is narrow, surrounded by silent fields that seem to stretch beyond what the eye can see. There are no flashy signs, just a discreet, aged wooden marker, almost hidden among bushes. It's as if the place doesn't want to be found, or as if it prefers to be forgotten. The protagonist, Ethan Caldwell, he arrives at the scene in the late afternoon. An investigative journalist specializing in unsolved historical cases, he carries with him a worn notebook, an old recorder, and a simple camera. He didn't come seeking fame or spectacle. He came because, after years covering modern crimes, he began to notice a disturbing pattern. Some events from the past remain vivid, not because they were poorly explained, but because they were deliberately suppressed. The house looms before him like a solid, unsettling presence. Peeling white paint, narrow windows, permanently drawn interior curtains. There are no signs of complete abandonment, but neither are there signs of life. The air around feels heavier, as if carrying something invisible. Ethan parks the car and remains inside for a few seconds, observing. No sound, no movement, yet the clear feeling of being watched. He's not the first to try to go in there. He knows that. He's read accounts from tourists who gave up before even crossing the threshold. Amateur investigators who claimed to feel dizzy, nauseous, and experience sudden panic. Some spoke of voices, others of shadows. Ethan, however, remains focused on the facts. In 1912, 8 people were brutally murdered there while they slept. No suspect was ever convicted. No definitive explanation was ever offered. The antagonist in the story doesn't present himself as a person, at least not immediately. He manifests himself as the silence of the house-like, the invisible resistance that the place imposes. Each floorboard seems to hold something it doesn't want revealed. The house doesn't threaten, it observes. And that's worse. Ethan walks through the low wooden gate. The creaking echoes loudly, breaking the silence almost aggressively. He mentally notes no wind. Even so, the sound reverberates like a warning. As he climbs the few steps to the balcony, he notices old marks on the floor, irregular scratches, too deep to be just wear and tear from time. He doesn't think about it for long. He just takes pictures. The front door is unlocked, as expected. When he pushes it open, the smell hits him first. Old wood, dust, and something metallic, almost imperceptible. The interior is too clean for a supposedly haunted house, too tidy, as if someone wanted to preserve everything exactly as it was left. Each room seems frozen in time. The living room, simple with period furniture. The kitchen with utensils lined up. No visible signs of violence. This contrast has always been what most disturbed investigators. The brutality of the crime left no obvious permanent marks. As if the house had absorbed everything, Ethan begins the recording. He doesn't talk about ghosts. He doesn't mention legends. He describes the space, the silence, the absence of any external sound. At a certain point, he notices something strange. The old clock on the wall of the room is stopped, exactly at the same time recorded in the police reports from 1912. He writes this down, feeling a growing unease, but moves on. Upstairs, the rooms reveal a different feeling. The air seems colder, not drastically, but enough to be noticeable. Upon entering the master bedroom, Ethan notices that the floor creaks unevenly, as if some planks were more fragile than others. He instinctively avoids certain areas without knowing why. That's where the first real doubt arises. Why does the house seem to react to his presence? There are no explicit manifestations, nothing supernatural evident, just minor inconsistencies. A crackling sound behind him when he's alone. A door that was ajar and is now closed. The recorder, for a moment, emits a low hissing sound, then returns to normal. Ethan doesn't panic. Yet. He records everything with almost obsessive precision. He knows that the real terror lies not in what is seen, but in what cannot be immediately explained. As the sun begins to set, the light streaming through the windows turns orange, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The house seems to shift shape as the light changes. The hallways appear narrower, the ceiling lower. At that moment, Ethan understands that the Villisca Axe murder house is not just the site of an old crime. It's a place where something was left unfinished, something that wasn't closed, investigated to the end, or exposed as it should have been. He wonders, for the first time since he arrived, whether he should really spend the night there. But the most important question has not yet been asked. Could someone before him have come too close to the truth and paid the price for it? When Ethan decides to stay in the house after sunset, it's not out of bravery, but by method. He always believed that certain places only reveal their true nature when the noise of the outside world disappears. During the day, the Villisca Axe murder house seemed like a historical reliquary. At night, it became something different. A space where time seemed to lose its consistency. He carefully sets up his equipment in the old children's room. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because records indicated that this room concentrated the majority of inconsistencies in the accounts over the years. Visitors reported contradictory sensations there: comfort and terror, protection and threat. Ethan doesn't ignore this detail. He never ignores patterns. The world around the house also begins to reveal itself more clearly. Villisca, the small town surrounding it, has always had an ambiguous relationship with the house. During the day, it's a discreet tourist attraction. At night, a silent taboo. Long-time residents avoid talking about it. They don't deny what happened. They just end the conversation quickly, as if prolonging it were dangerous. Ethan remembers the interview he conducted weeks earlier with a retired local police officer. The man didn't talk about ghosts, but about missing documents, incomplete reports, ignored testimonies. He said, in a firm voice, that the mistake wasn't a lack of clues, but an excess of them, too much information pointing in inconvenient directions. This detail comes back to Ethan's mind when he notices something unusual. Almost invisible marks on the walls of the upper corridor. They are not stains or cracks. They are smooth, vertical lines, as if something had been repeatedly placed there. He photographs them, measures them, compares them with old images. No official record mentions them. The secondary characters begin to take shape, even in physical absence. The Moore family and the two children, invited to spend the night, appear in the accounts that Ethan revisits, not as distant victims, but as persistent presences. He notices something unsettling. All the accounts describe the house as silent that night in 1912. No screams heard, no fights recorded by neighbors. That silence now seems to echo. The house reacts subtly to Ethan's movements. Not with doors slamming or objects moving, but with small environmental changes. The air becomes drier in some rooms, colder in others. The sound of footsteps changes intensity without logical explanation. Each room seems to have its own set of rules. Ethan begins to develop a routine within the house. He notes the times, temperatures, and sounds. He marks in his notebook the points where he feels the most physical discomfort, always the same ones. He realizes that at certain times, the recorder picks up noises that he didn't hear live. Not clear voices, but variations in frequency, as if something were briefly interfering with the air. The antagonism of the place becomes clearer. The house doesn't try to expel him, it keeps him there. Each discovery generates more questions, and each question distances him from the idea of leaving. The tension doesn't come from immediate fear, but from the constant feeling that something is being slowly prepared. Upon revisiting the kitchen, Ethan notices that the arrangement of the objects doesn't exactly match the historical photos. Small differences. A plate a few centimeters off, an empty hook where there used to be a utensil. Changes too minimal to be noticed by ordinary tourists, but glaring to someone trained in observing details. He understands then that the world of that house is not frozen in the past. It continues to adjust. Ethan doesn't say it out loud, but he writes down a short sentence in his notebook. The mistake may not have been who killed, but who decided what should not be seen. This perception changes the way he sees everything. The Villisca Axe murder house ceases to be just an old crime scene and becomes a point of convergence, of human decisions, of omissions, of fragmented truths. The terror lies not in the explicit supernatural, but in the possibility that the truth was always there, visible, and was ignored. As the night progresses, Ethan senses that he is no longer just investigating a crime. He is entering a system that has been carefully kept silent for over a century, and the house, patiently, seems to approve of every step he takes. Dawn arrives slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan notices this, not by the clock, which remains motionless on the living room wall, but by the gradual change in the house. Silence grows thicker. It's not an absence of sound. It's as if any noise is absorbed before it can fully develop. He decides to try something simple. He walks down the upper hallway in rhythmic steps, counting mentally. On the 5th step, the sound of the floorboards changes. On the 8th, it disappears completely. He stops. He remains motionless for several seconds. No echo, no return. When he takes a step back, the creaking reappears exactly as before. There is no immediate logic to it. The conflict ceases to be merely investigative and becomes physical. Ethan feels his body reacting to the environment involuntarily, a slight tightness in his chest in certain rooms, a sudden discomfort behind his eyes as he approaches the stairs. Nothing intense enough to force him to leave, but too persistent to ignore. He revisits the printed police reports he brought. Something has always bothered him. The estimated time of the murders was never precisely determined. The times vary, as do the sequences described. Some documents were clearly rewritten, others crossed out. Comparing this information with the actual layout of the rooms, Ethan notices a disturbing detail. The official sequence doesn't make spatial sense. To follow the order described in the reports, the killer would have had to cross the corridor noisily, repeatedly passing through areas where the floor creaked loudly. Even so, no one woke up. No escape attempt was recorded. The conflict intensifies when Ethan realizes he's not just observing the house, he's being directed by it. Trying to access the basement, he finds the door jammed, not locked, just resistant. He forces it once, twice, nothing. Giving up and going back upstairs, he hears a dry crack coming from the upper floor. When he returns to the hallway, one of the bedroom doors is open. He is absolutely certain that he had left it closed. Ethan enters cautiously. The room looks the same, but something is out of place. The rug has been moved a few centimeters. Too little to notice at first glance, but enough to alter the symmetry of the space. He kneels down and lifts the rug. Below it, marks on the floor. Deep parallel scratches, as if something heavy had been repeatedly dragged across that area. No tourist guide mentions it. No historical record makes reference to it. The conflict now takes on a new layer. The official narrative not only fails, it hides the truth. Secondary characters begin to emerge more strongly through past events. A researcher from that time, whose name appears only once in a marginal report, is mentioned as being responsible for a reassessment that was never completed. The document ends abruptly. The following pages do not exist. Ethan connects the dots. Spatial inconsistencies, missing documents, ignored physical markers. Everything points to an interrupted investigation, not for lack of answers, but for too many. The house reacts again. The recorder, left on the table, activates by itself for a few seconds. It doesn't capture clear words, but it records a rhythmic sound, similar to footsteps, but slower, dragging. Ethan was in the hallway at that moment. He wasn't moving. The tension grows not with explicit shocks, but with the constant feeling that every advance comes at a cost. The house doesn't reveal itself all at once. It offers fragments, as if testing the resolve of those who try to understand it. Ethan tries to rationalize. He looks for drafts, external vibrations, any plausible explanation. Some persist for minutes, others disappear as soon as he changes position within the house. The environment seems to respond to human presence selectively. The conflict reaches a new level when Ethan realizes that certain spaces simply refuse to be ignored. Every time he tries to concentrate on taking notes or reviewing documents, something interrupts him. A distant noise, a sudden change in temperature, the clear feeling of being in the wrong place. It's not fear that drives him now. It's confrontation. He understands that the Villisca axe murder house is not a passive setting. It actively participates in the story, influencing decisions, guiding movements, and most importantly, controlling the pace of revelation. The antagonist is neither a visible spirit nor a defined entity. It is the sum of everything that has been omitted. At dawn, as the cold light begins to invade the rooms, Ethan realizes something unsettling. He spent the entire night there without noticing the passage of time. No feeling of extreme tiredness. No clear break between night and morning. The central conflict is established in full force. Discovering the truth could mean disrupting a balance maintained for over 100 years. And the house, silent, seems prepared to react. With morning now settled, Ethan realizes the house is changing again. The daylight brings no relief. It only reveals new details that the darkness had hidden. What once seemed like mere wear and tear of time now reveals itself as deliberate alterations. Small, poorly documented renovations. Boards replaced without record, nails from different eras in the same room. The first subplot begins to take shape from a seemingly trivial detail: the basement. The door's resistance the previous night was no accident. With the daylight, Ethan tries again. This time the door gives way with excessive ease, almost as if it had never been stuck. The contrast puts him on alert. The basement is low, stuffy, and smells of old earth. There are no personal belongings there, only structures. Reinforced beams in specific places, more solid than necessary to support the house. This doesn't correspond to the construction standards of the time. Ethan photographs, measures, compares with old blueprints he brought with him. Something there was altered after 1912. The second subplot emerges outside the house, through the memory of an interview he almost dismissed. An elderly woman, a resident of Villisca, had mentioned that her grandfather participated in a community vigil weeks after the murders. Officially, this never happened. No police record, no newspaper mention. Yet more than one family in the town mentioned the same event, always with visible discomfort. These vigils were not religious in nature. They were closed, nighttime meetings, held away from home. Ethan begins to suspect that the collective fear wasn't just of the crime itself, but of what might be revealed if someone investigated too closely. The third subplot unfolds within Ethan's own behavior. He begins to notice subtle changes in himself. He doesn't lose his mind, he doesn't collapse, but his perception of priorities shifts. Eating, sleeping, leaving the house, everything becomes secondary. He finds himself postponing simple decisions without realizing it. The house doesn't physically confine him, but it reorganizes what seems important. These subplots converge when Ethan finds a hidden compartment behind one of the basement walls. It's not a makeshift hiding place. It's a deliberate structure, accessible only if someone knows exactly where to press. Inside, there are no valuables, no weapons, no official documents. There is only one notebook. The pages are yellowed but legible. This is no ordinary personal diary. It's a fragmented record, written by someone directly involved in the original investigation. The entries don't describe ghosts or supernatural theories. They speak of external pressure, of silent orders, of conclusions that should not be reached. The author's name appears only once, abbreviated, the same name that Ethan had seen in the incomplete report. The complexity increases when Ethan realizes that some pages have been torn out, not randomly, but following a specific logic. Key dates, decisive moments, all carefully removed. While he reads, the house remains strangely quiet. No noise, no interference. It's as if that were an acceptable limit, a tolerated advance. Ethan understands that he is not dealing with just a criminal mystery, but with a silent pact built over decades. The city, the house, and the institutions of the time seem to have collaborated, consciously or not, to keep certain truths buried. Time pressure mounts when he realizes he's not alone outside. A car slowly drives past on the road. Then it drives past again. It doesn't stop. It doesn't approach. It just watches. The Villisca Axe murder house, despite its isolation, has never truly been beyond human reach. The subplots intertwine, the altered structure of the house, the silent vigilance of the community, the silenced investigator, and Ethan's gradual transformation. Everything points to the same axis. The truth was not lost, it was contained. And the closer Ethan gets to her, the clearer it becomes that disrupting this balance could have consequences that extend far beyond that house. The question ceases to be, what happened in 1912? It becomes, who still needs this to remain hidden? The turning point doesn't happen explosively. It settles in gradually, almost silently, like everything else in that house. Ethan realizes this when he rereads the notebook found in the basement for the third time. Something that previously seemed like just a technical detail begins to stand out in a disturbing way. The author of the notebook was not investigating who he killed. He was investigating how many people were in the house that night. This finding completely changes the direction of the investigation. Official records have always assumed a single intruder, someone who entered, committed the murders, and left unseen. However, the notebook describes simultaneous movements in opposite parts of the house, noises perceived by neighbors at times inconsistent with the final version, and most unsettlingly, the researchers' certainty that there was more than one active presence inside the residence. Ethan cross-references this information with the physical space, with the marks under the carpet, with the structural changes in the basement, with the logical impossibility of the sequence described in the reports. Everything begins to fall into place. The turning point solidifies when Ethan realizes that the house is no longer trying to distract him. She drives. Without realizing it, he begins to move in the same order. Kitchen, stairs, hallway, children's room, basement, always in this cycle. Not out of habit, but because any attempt to break this sequence generates immediate discomfort, nausea, dizziness, intense pressure in the ears. By following the cycle once more, something changes. In the upper hallway, in front of the master bedroom, Ethan notices that the floor gives way slightly under his weight. It's not a loose plank. It's a specific spot, designed to give way. He kneels down and presses with his hand. The sound is hollow. The revelation comes with physical effort, not reflection. He forces the board and removes it. Beneath it, there is no common compartment, but a narrow space, just enough for someone to crawl between the rooms. An internal access, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to step. The impact of the discovery is not accompanied by immediate fear, but by a profound sense of violation. The house was not just a place where something happened. It was adapted so that something would happen. The emotional turning point occurs when Ethan understands the implication of this. If there was more than one person moving around there, and if the house was altered to allow for silent movements, then the crime wasn't just an isolated act of violence. It was an operation. At that moment, the house reacted differently from anything Ethan had experienced before. There are no noises. There are no temperature drops. There is memory. Fragmented images emerge not as supernatural visions, but as involuntary reconstructions. Ethan's mind fills in the empty spaces with brutal logic, coordinated footsteps, doors opened in the correct order, victims unable to react because there was never time. The antagonist is fully revealed here, not as an entity, but as the truth, organized so that it will never be questioned. The notebook confirms this in the last preserved pages. The original investigator writes about an unofficial meeting with city representatives and outside authorities. No names are mentioned, only roles. He describes the exact moment when he realizes his investigation has reached an imposed limit. The final sentence in the notebook is short and definitive. It is not permitted to conclude. The turning point is complete when Ethan understands that the house was never haunted by spirits. It is haunted by an interruption, a process forcibly interrupted, an event that never came to an end. And now, by revealing the hidden structure, Ethan reactivates something that has remained suspended for over a century. Outside, the car that had passed by earlier returns. This time, it parks. There is no hurry. There is no attempt to get in, just presence. Ethan understands that he is no longer dealing with just a historical mystery. He has crossed an invisible boundary, the same one the original researcher crossed. The house, which had previously been merely an observer, now demands a decision. To continue means confronting something greater than the crime itself. It means challenging a silence, maintained not out of fear of the supernatural, but out of human convenience. Ethan keeps the notebook in his backpack, aware that this object is not just evidence, it's a risk. The tipping point redefines everything. The crime ceases to be inexplicable, terror ceases to be supernatural, and the house ceases to be an isolated mystery. It becomes a knot within something much larger, and Ethan is now a part of it. The revelation brings no relief. It weighs heavily. After discovering the hidden access point in the floor, Ethan's perception of the house changes irreversibly. Each corridor ceases to be merely a passageway and becomes a vector of control. Each door, once simple, now seems part of a larger mechanism, designed to guide movements, silence reactions, and limit choices. The first consequence is immediate and physical. Ethan tries to leave the house to breathe, to reorganize his thoughts. The front door opens normally, but as he crosses the threshold, he feels a sudden dizziness, intense enough to force him to lean against the outside wall. The world around him seems slightly displaced, as if the balance between inside and outside has been compromised. It's not a direct impediment. It's a warning. He remains outside for a few minutes, watching the road. The car parked further ahead remains there, motionless. Tinted windows, engine off, no attempt at contact. The mere presence reinforces an uncomfortable certainty. The discovery did not go unnoticed. Upon returning inside, Ethan realizes that something has changed in his relationship with the house. Before, he reacted to the environment. Now, he anticipates it. He moves with heightened caution, avoids certain spots on the floor, tests each door before crossing it completely. His body has absorbed the rules of the place without him needing to rationalize them. This adaptation is the second consequence. The house begins to function better for him, or perhaps he is functioning better for the house. Sounds diminish. Interferences cease. The atmosphere stabilizes as if the initial resistance had been overcome. The silence is no longer oppressive. It is attentive. Ethan understands that the house reacts not to human presence but to intention. While he sought to understand, she resisted. Now that he knows too much to back down, the house stops testing and begins to observe. The emotional consequences are more subtle, yet more dangerous. Upon reviewing his notes, Ethan notices gaps, unrecorded times, actions he remembers taking but didn't write down, small decisions that seem to have been made without conscious reflection. There's no clear memory loss. There's too much continuity, as if certain parts of the experience had been softened, made acceptable. He tries to call a fellow journalist. There's a signal, but the call drops repeatedly before connecting. Messages get stuck in the sending process. Nothing explicitly prevents him from communicating, but everything seems to delay, distort, or weaken the attempt. Another consequence is evident in the notebook found in the basement. Upon rereading the final passages, Ethan notices something he had overlooked. The original investigator wasn't immediately silenced. He continued working for weeks after writing those pages, but his focus shifted. The last notes speak less of the crime and more of need to close, do not resolve, close. This pattern is reflected in Ethan in a disturbing way. He begins to wonder not how to expose the truth, but how to finalize the process, how to close something that should never have been opened. The house doesn't demand absolute silence. It demands control of the narrative. The external pressure mounts when Ethan notices recent marks on the porch floor. Footprints. They aren't old. Someone was there while he dozed for a few minutes on the living room sofa, his first involuntary rest since arriving. Nothing was taken. No doors were forced, just enough presence to be noticed. The consequences accumulate and converge in the same direction. Each step forward reduces the possibilities of return. Ethan can still leave. He can still go away. But he understands, with uncomfortable clarity, that leaving without resolving something would not sever the bond created. The house doesn't chase those who run away. She waits for those who hesitate. As night falls again, Ethan feels that time has begun to behave strangely once more. The clock remains stopped. The outside light seems constant, as if the day were stuck in an in-between state. The house's cycle is re-established. The ultimate consequence of this stage is not explicit terror, but forced acceptance. Ethan is no longer just an observer. He is an agent within an ancient system, reactivated by the very search for answers. And now, every reaction from the house makes it clear that it will not allow disorderly advances, only definitive choices. Ethan's change doesn't happen suddenly. There's no solemn decision, no moment of absolute clarity. Growth arises from necessity. He understands that if he continues reacting to the house, he will be consumed by it. To move forward, he needs to reverse the dynamic. The first way to overcome this is through practice. Ethan establishes his own rules within the house. He sets schedules, even without trusting the clock. He marks time with repeated actions, reviewing notes, walking the same corridors, rearranging equipment. This structure is not merely methodological, it's an anchor. For the first time since arriving, he imposes a rhythm on the environment instead of following it. The house does not react with hostility. She observes. The second form of growth is emotional. Ethan stops trying to protect himself from the psychological impact of the discoveries. Instead, he begins to confront them directly. He revisits the children's room slowly, not to look for supernatural signs, but to understand the logistics of the crime. He measures distances, he calculates times, he simulates movements. In doing so, something changes. The emotional weight of the space diminishes. It doesn't disappear, but it loses its capacity to paralyze. The house ceases to be an abstract symbol of terror and becomes an object of concrete analysis. This rationalization doesn't weaken the narrative. It strengthens the conflict. Ethan understands that the true horror lies not in what the house does, but in what it was, planned inside it. The third layer of overcoming emerges when he decides to confront the external presence. Late in the afternoon, Ethan deliberately leaves the house, walks to the road, and observes his surroundings without hiding. The car returns, as expected, and stops at a safe distance. No approach, no direct threat, just surveillance. Ethan doesn't react, he doesn't take photos, he doesn't write anything down, he simply remains visible. This simple gesture alters the balance. The surveillance is no longer one-sided. He ceases to be merely observed and begins to recognize the observer. When the car drives away, he knows that something has been communicated, even without words. Intellectual growth manifests itself when Ethan reorganizes all the information collected, not as an immediate article or exposé, but as a causality map. He identifies key decisions, omissions, points of human intervention. He realizes that the crime was only the beginning. The real system formed afterward, around the silence. Upon rereading the original investigator's notebook, Ethan notices something he had previously ignored. The handwriting changes on the last pages. Not due to physical wear and tear, but due to hesitation. The sentences become shorter, less assertive. The man hasn't lost his mind, he's lost his autonomy. This perception is crucial. Ethan understands that overcoming in that context doesn't mean revealing everything at once. It means to regain control of one's own intention. The house and the system around it function best when the individual acts on impulse or fear. He does the opposite. Take your time choosing. You decide what to record. You decide what to leave for later. You decide what to take with you and what shouldn't leave the house yet. Each conscious decision weakens the invisible influence that tries to direct you. The house responds with an almost disconcerting stability. No strange noises. No interference, as if it accepted the new posture. The final growth of this stage occurs when Ethan acknowledges his own vulnerability without allowing it to define him. He sees himself neither as a hero nor as a victim. He is simply someone who entered an old system and learned to move within it without being absorbed. As night falls, he notices that the physical discomfort has lessened. The air seems lighter, the hallways wider. Not because the house has changed, but because he has stopped resisting in a chaotic way. Ethan did not win the conflict, but he stopped being dominated by it. Overcoming in this context is not about the end of the threat. It's about the ability to keep moving forward without losing one's own identity. And this sets the stage for what comes next. The house enters a state of quiet expectation. There are no abrupt events, no strange manifestations. Precisely for this reason, Ethan understands that he is approaching something decisive. The pattern repeats itself in all the complex systems he has investigated. Before the rupture comes artificial stability. He begins to wrap up the subplots one by one, aware that any distraction now could be costly. The first closure occurs with the basement. Ethan returns to the space with meticulous attention, revisiting each reinforced beam, each structural point out of the ordinary. He realizes that the alterations were not made merely for silent movement, but for acoustic control. Certain areas absorb sound almost perfectly. Others direct it. The house has been transformed into an instrument. This finding eliminates a persistent doubt. The silence on the night of the murders was no coincidence. It was engineering. Ethan documents everything objectively, without emotional interpretations. He no longer seeks to convince anyone at that moment. He only wants to ensure that the information exists outside the house. The second subplot is resolved with external surveillance. The car doesn't return that night. No visible presence on the road. This doesn't represent security, but a change of strategy. Ethan understands that by becoming predictable and controlled, he has ceased to be an immediate target. Now he is a problem under evaluation. This absence increases the tension. Time begins to behave strangely again. The light of dusk stretches beyond normal, as if the day refuses to advance. The house seems suspended between states, awaiting something that has not yet happened. Ethan feels this physically, not as fear, but as forced concentration. He organizes his materials for a single final action. He separates what will stay there from what will go with him, not out of superstition, but out of logic. Not everything can cross the boundaries of the house without consequences. The original investigator's notebook remains in the backpack, but Ethan wraps it carefully, as if isolating something unstable. Psychological preparation becomes central. Ethan accepts that the climax will not come as a physical confrontation or spectacular revelation. It will come as irreversible decision. The system surrounding the Villisca axe murder house is not sustained by force, but by continuity. Breaking it requires an irreversible action. He revisits the upper corridor one last time. He walks slowly, feeling every variation in the floor. He stops exactly over the hollow spot where he discovered the hidden access. He doesn't open it. He simply acknowledges it. The house responds with absolute silence. Unlike anything he has experienced before, it's not observation, it's mindful attention. Ethan understands that the house holds no loyalty to secrecy or truth. It responds to action that redefines its role. For decades, it has been a repository of imposed silence. Now, it is about to become something else, for better or for worse. The last subplot to be resolved is internal. Ethan abandons the idea of total control. He accepts that he cannot foresee all the consequences, nor guarantee complete protection. The growth that brought him to this point does not eliminate risk, it only makes him aware of it. This acceptance eliminates the last vestige of hesitation. The tension intensifies when the clock in the room makes a dry, crackling sound. For the first time since Ethan arrived, the second hand moves. The house, which had been suspended until then, is once again entering the flow of time. This seemingly simple detail carries enormous weight. Something that was interrupted is about to continue. Neutrality is no longer possible. The preparation ends the instant time moves forward again. Ethan knows that the next step will not allow for adjustments. The climax will not be about discovering something new. It will be about what to do with everything that has already been discovered. The clock's ticking isn't loud, but it dominates everything. Every second now exists. Every interval has weight. The house, which for so long remained suspended, once again actively participates in the world. And Ethan understands that there's no more room for passive observation. He positions himself in the center of the room, exactly where the hallways and the staircase converge. It's not a symbolic gesture. It's strategic. From there, the house doesn't easily guide him. He feels it in his body. The diffuse pressure that previously pushed him down certain paths simply doesn't happen. The climax doesn't begin with movement, but with choice. Ethan turns on the main camera and the recorder at the same time, not to record phenomena, but to document them. An action. He speaks for the first time since arriving, with a firm voice, without theatricality. He doesn't describe ghosts or supernatural theories. He describes the system. It speaks of the engineering of silence, of hidden access points, of the logic that makes an official version impossible. Each word is not a request for permission, but a declaration of closure. The house reacts, not with violent noises, but with disorganization. The delicate balance that kept everything functional breaks down. The air seems to move erratically. Doors that never closed on their own now creak slowly. The floor responds out of sequence. It's not an attack. It's a loss of control. Ethan segue. He heads to the upper hallway, not by his usual route, but reversing the order. For the first time, the house doesn't anticipate him. The discomfort returns, more intense, but not paralyzing. He feels dizzy, a sudden heaviness in his legs, but he continues. At the hollow point in the floor, he kneels and opens the hidden access completely. The narrow space reveals its true extent. It connects not only two rooms, but runs through the heart of the house. An invisible corridor designed to eliminate noise, to allow presence without detection. There is no supernatural mystery there, Only human intention crystallized in wood and nails. The climax intensifies when Ethan does the one thing the system doesn't anticipate. He leaves the space open. It doesn't enter. It doesn't explore. It doesn't try to activate anything. It exposes. In doing so, the house undergoes a functional collapse, not a structural one, but a narrative one. The secret depends on concealment. Without it, it loses coherence. Silence ceases to be protection and becomes evidence. Ethan returns to the room and continues talking, describing exactly what was designed never to be seen. The recorder captures everything. The camera records every detail. The ultimate antagonist manifests itself not as an entity, but as a human reaction. External lights stream through the windows. Headlights, more than one vehicle. People approach the house, not urgently but certainly. The surveillance ceases to be discreet. The confrontation is not physical. No one is forcing their way in. They know that any direct intervention now would produce the exact opposite effect. Ethan feels the real risk for the first time. Not irrational fear, but calculation. He understands that if he goes out with that material, there will be no way to control the impact. The system that has remained stable for over a century will not survive complete exposure. The emotional climax occurs when he realizes that the house is not holding up against him. She's resisting the return of silence. The walls creak, not as a threat, but as a release of tension. The atmosphere loses the oppressive rigidity that characterized it. For the first time, the Villisca axe murder house seems empty. Ethan makes the final choice. He shuts down the internal recording, removes the memory cards, and keeps only a portion of the material for himself. The rest he leaves there, deliberately visible, impossible to ignore. It's not destruction, it's a redistribution of control. When he leaves the house, he doesn't run, he doesn't hide. Night has fallen completely, now in a normal, continuous way. His internal clock keeps ticking. The people outside don't stop him. They observe, they assess. He walks past them like someone who can no longer be contained in the same way as before. The climax is resolved not with an explosion, but with a silent rupture. The old balance is falling apart. The house finally ceases to be merely an instrument, and the silence, once broken, cannot be restored in the same way. Ethan doesn't look back as he leaves the house. Not out of fear nor out of defiance, but because he understands that the bond was broken the moment silence lost its purpose. The Villisca axe murder house remains there motionless, but something essential has changed. It no longer controls what happens around it. The road seems shorter as you leave, the air lighter. The outside world reasserts itself with familiar sounds. Wind in the fields, the car engine starting, the distant creak of a fence. Nothing supernatural, nothing threatening. Just continuity. In the days that follow, the consequences spread unevenly. Ethan doesn't immediately publish everything he recorded. The choice made at the climax stands. Part of the material is given to independent institutions, outside the traditional press circuit. Another part remains archived, not as a secret, but as a strategic reserve. He now understands that exposing the truth is not a single act. It's a process. Reactions emerge without official announcements. The house is temporarily closed for structural assessments. Local authorities avoid interviews. Old archives begin to be discreetly reclassified. Documents previously considered irrelevant reappear in digital collections. Nothing is admitted publicly. But nothing is exactly denied. The Villisca axe murder house is no longer treated as a haunted attraction, but is now discussed in technical, historical, and architectural terms. Experts question structural alterations. Researchers raise hypotheses previously considered unfeasible. The 1912 crime remains unsolved, but it is no longer treated as an isolated mystery either. This change is sufficient. Ethan realizes that the real impact lies not in revealing a culprit, but in dismantling the narrative that prevented new questions. The system that has endured for over a century doesn't collapse all at once, but it loses its stability. And unstable systems don't survive the test of time. As for the house, it remains silent. A different kind of silence. Visitors report that the atmosphere seems too ordinary for a place so steeped in history. There is no sense of oppression. There is no immediate discomfort. Some even describe it as empty, not abandoned but devoid of purpose. The terror, it seems, was never confined to the walls. It was present in what was kept outside of them. Ethan continues his work, but something within him remains altered. He no longer seeks only hidden answers. He seeks to understand who decides what can or cannot be closed. The experience didn't make him paranoid nor cynical. It made him precise. The story of the Villisca axe murder house doesn't end with full justice, nor with a final confession. It ends with something rarer, the impossibility of returning to absolute silence. Some truths don't need to be fully stated to have an impact. They just need to stop being buried. Months later, a worker responsible for a structural inspection of the old house makes a simple note in his report. Nothing technical, nothing alarming. He writes that, while walking down the upper hallway, he noticed something unusual. The floor wasn't creaking, no board gave way, no hollow point responded to the weight of the body. The house seemed ordinary. The detail doesn't generate investigation or public curiosity. It goes unnoticed among bureaucratic pages. But for those who know the story, the silence in that report says it all. Something that remained hidden for over a century has finally been brought to a close. Now that you've reached the end of this story, the most important question isn't about the house. It's about the silence. How many places, events, and stories remain shrouded in mystery, not for lack of answers, but because of human choices? If this narrative has provoked reflection, share your interpretation. What do you believe really happened? Should the truth always come to light, even when it shakes old structures? Leave your comment, join the conversation, and share this story with anyone who enjoys mystery, psychological horror, and real-life enigmas. Sometimes asking questions is the first step in breaking the silence.